Hi, Anti-Society! Welcome back to the Antisocial Planet. Today we're getting into some more Vinland Saga, and we had this escaped slave a focal point in the last episode. A lot of that was happening in the periphery of the main story with Thorfinn and the farmer who was ill and dealing with the something coming to an end, right? Both symbolically in terms of Thorfinn and Anna thinking that they are going to be free soon and what to do about that, especially with Thorfinn, him not really knowing what he's going to do next and what he wants to be doing or who he wants to be with or where he wants to be. So there's that ending. Then there's also this ending of a life and someone just getting too old to continue to live the healthy, productive life that he wants to, which is very difficult for him and those around him. And then also having this escaped slave who is taking revenge in a very violent way with the people that he is interacting with, which I can't entirely knock because he was enslaved, but we have a connection now that he had a wife, and the wife is the woman that Anna is in love with and doesn't want to leave without freeing. Complexities happening just on the farm, not even getting into the fact that there is a fight for the farm incoming from Canute. Lots going on, and I'm not entirely sure where we're going to focus in on this episode, but let's just get into it and see what madness we have. In 3, 2, 1, go. Ooh, okay. We're going right into the new opener, which is far more like rock and roll shonen. I love this idea of this, like, almost like straw man imagery in it as well. Like having this like figure made of sticks feels very like both like sacrificial, but then also you have like straw man in terms of fallacies, or even just like scarecrows, like, you know, like this almost like sacrifice in like a stand-in for that, which is interesting. There's also like just a lot of violence in this opener that we didn't have in the first one, considering that Thorfinn's whole thing now is not being violent. It'll be interesting to see how he deals with there being a bunch of violence around him or being forced in to those violent situations. Because he wasn't like inherently violent before, right? Like we know that he was forced into a life where violence was a way of survival. Freedom. Two of you. Because Catil, maybe? I was wondering about whether or not he would be happy to see her, because she seems a little bit shook. I'm assuming that they were forced apart. You know, put on different farms intentionally, right? But I was like, I don't know if they'll be entirely happy to be around. Whomst? Or is this the two of you? He said two before, so is there another person that should be here? Oh no. Is there a child? Because I'm assuming it's three of you together. That means that they had a family of some kind. Which also goes back to the previous thing where when he escaped his farm, there was a woman and a child, and he let them live. Did you just hurt the horse as well? What did the horse do? Oh. Yeah, maybe don't poke the bear. Yeah, there's something unhinged. He has killed a few people at this point. I guess that's too, like, I was thinking of, like, whether or not they would want to see each other also in terms of, aren't he? I don't know if I'm going to pronounce her name correctly. She would want to see him because he's definitely not the same person that like he was before they were separated. And he's done a lot of things now. I think he knows it's reckless. I think it's fairly evident that that is what is happening right now. Stay out of it. He's unhinged and out for blood. Do not get involved. But does she want to go with him? Yeah. And also, would she be safe with him at this point, right? I know that it's her husband, but is she safe with him now as like she would have been before when she married him? I also feel like this scene has less impact considering he did try to strangle Thorfinn. Like, you know, just being like, oh, Anna, are you prepared to kill someone? I'm like, yeah, apparently. Almost. Which I think someone pointed out to me was something that they added into the anime as not in the source material, which makes sense because they just act like that never happened. I'm like, I'm sorry, we're just like never gonna loop back to the fact that that happened. Oh, the animation though. He does seem to be swinging wildly with not a lot of precision, but that might be okay. No. I don't think any of the blood on that cloak is from him. Leaving him alive. Interesting decision. Oof. Things are getting complicated. Oh. I mean, I it's so complicated because I'm like on the one hand, I could understand him lashing out. On the other hand, he did kill people. And he does, yeah, he does intend to kill more people. So, and what does she want, right? Like, does she even know? Because she just was reunited with him and he's different now. Clearly, yeah, I'm like, he's definitely seems manic. So does she even want to be with him? Does she want him to be free? And knowing that he'll kind of have this like single-minded need to find her and to have her like living with him, like would she be safe in that situation? I don't think she even knows. I think that she should be allowed to choose, but I think it is, you need to think about whether or not it is a safe decision for her to make, regardless of her like personal feelings, because of obviously she cared enough at some point to marry him. Like there was some connection there. Dude, you need to like go for a walk or something. Get the energy out. Yeah, have we asked what she wants? Because it doesn't seem like anyone is doing that. Unlikely. I think she understands this situation more than you do. Well, they could be changed, but some people are not valuing human life the way that they should. It does seem to be her way to dissociate. We saw that before with the way that she interacts with Katil. I don't know if it's right. Okay, so we have an arranged marriage and a son. Okay. Do I want to know what happened to the son? He's not gonna agree with you. He doesn't fight anymore. Oh. Are we gonna get backstory? Am I gonna cry? I wasn't ready for the emotional weight of a backstory about a lost child. All right. Rip my heart out. You're Swedish. Interesting. Yeah, I was like, uh-oh, we found something valuable in the land, which is never a good thing. That always makes awful people show up. But you'd ruin the quiet life that you have. Interesting to say the men decided to fight. I know that that's part of the hierarchy of the time period, but Yeah, what do you need the iron for other than it's considered a valuable metal? Yeah, why are you risking your life for something we don't need? Wealthy in what way? How is it not wealthy now? In that you have exactly what you need. Oh, the like fight to protect him. And I know what happens to this child. He could have protected us better by staying with us. Yep. What was value? Like, what's wealth, right? Is wealth metals and physical objects, or is it relationships and families and finding happiness in what you have? Oh no. I was like, I have a bad feeling about this. But it's not gonna be your, like, the men from the village. Oh. I feel like it hits for Thorfinn too because he knows what it means to like be a child taken away from your family and your home. What child? Are we having a child? Oh dear. Oh, that does complicate things. I thought we were complicated when we had a husband. Probably, but also with his wife? And what happens to the child? Because it's, I don't know. I'm like, are you going to be able to keep the child? At some point, I feel like the child's going to be taken away from you again because you are still a slave. Interesting, too, to have the like stay here because she just talked about how if her husband had stayed with her and like she wanted him to stay instead of going and fighting and starting like the storm, being part of the storm, then things would have been better. And he could have protected her and their child. So like asking like Anna to stay feels like pulling from that experience, right? Of like needing someone to not like abandon her or like leave her. Interesting to have like the fire spark up though when she thinks about losing her son. Like that's where the spark of emotion comes from. I was talking about how she has this tendency to dissociate a lot, but when it comes to her child, she's incapable of not pulling on that like emotion and that pain and um all of the emotional turmoil that comes with that memory. He was. Mm-hmm. Is that all we're going to do? I think there's a need for closure, right? Like needing to see him in a way that isn't like the turmoil of before when there were people around and looking for him and really, I'm assuming not the person he ended up married to. Interesting, given that he is not a fighter. Yeah. Ooh. So it was a sacrifice for nothing, really. Love the contrast of both of their hands and like they're both like beat up and worn. Mm-hmm. Interesting say leave scars behind. And I was just talking about like their hands being all like beat up and worn. Like they're both have working hands, despite the fact that there's a difference in station, right? Will you? I don't know if she'll be back. I don't know if once they're near each other that he'll like not want to immediately escape and run away with her. Beautiful coloring work on that like final shot though. Like the purples with the grays. I wasn't really expecting to get a whole backstory from her. I guess it makes sense because we do have the introduction of her husband coming. Arnhid? I don't know if I'm going to pronounce her name correctly because I'm watching the sub and they're pronouncing it with a Japanese accent. So I'm not going to get close to what it would be in the Swedish, which is not a language that I know a lot of to be able to figure out what the phonology of it would be. However, learning about her backstory obviously going to be tragic because both her and her husband are slaves. So it's not going to be a good backstory, but going into a lot of what motivates her. And I think it's very interesting that we have a whole bunch of dynamics with her, right? I felt unsettled with her, and I think maybe part of that is the dissociation from what's going on with her. She tends to just back out of her emotions and disconnect from situations, and there's something unnerving about seeing someone going through all of these horrible things and being completely blank about it. There's something scary about seeing her husband and the way that he has just become almost manic. I say almost, he hasn't got on a killing spree, but he has a very manic way of dealing with everything that's happened with him, and anytime that something happens that is connected to the trauma that he has gone through, he responds with this violent and desperate active reaction, whereas she tends to pull away from it and dissociate and empty herself out because that is the way of her coping with what's going on. And there is something inherently unsettling about seeing someone detach so much, but it is a very normal way of dealing with trauma and just coping with everything that has happened with her. She has been through so much that it makes sense that her body is just like, and her mind is just incapable of dealing with all of it at the same time and needs to pull away from it. But there's an added layer to her experience of, and I think it touched on this in this episode, is in that she is not only a slave, she is a woman. And there's a whole other layer of powerlessness in that, in terms of even if you're a slave, like we have with Thorfinn and Eanad, they're still also men. And that inherently has more power than the women around them. There's very complex dynamics with gender wrapped into the culture of a time period coming into today, and then you layer on having slavery existing, and there's an added thing to it. There's so much to that issue, and I definitely cannot even briefly go into all of the complexities of that in this video because I am not fully qualified to talk about that, and also we would be here for a very long time to even scratch the surface of that particular issue. But I think that it is important to include that in her story, right? The fact that her talking even before becoming a slave, saying the men decided and the women were surprised and didn't want to do it, but there's nothing that they could do, right? And even having Snake saying earlier in the episode, the slave's opinion doesn't count, and having that juxtaposed with the fact that Arnhid, even when she wasn't a slave, her opinion didn't count because she was a woman, and now she is also a slave. So there's really nothing that she can say or do that has any power over the situation, because there are all of these men making decisions on her behalf and people who own her that are making decisions on her behalf, bringing in that extra layer of her feeling powerless and feeling like she needs to just dissociate and pull away and wait for the storm to be over, because what is she supposed to do? She didn't start the storm. She didn't want to be roped into it. She was forced into it by men making decisions that affected her and her family and didn't consider what she wanted. And I was even saying before that, where everyone was having all of these different reactions to her husband being there and whether or not he should be rescuing her or taking her away or whatever, everyone having all these opinions, they're all men and they're all trying to make a decision about what she should be doing. And I was like, what does she want? Has anyone asked? What does she want? Does she want to be with her husband? Does she want to leave with him? Does she feel safe with him? Would it be a safe situation for her? What does she want? And no one was asking. Even Eanad, who is probably the nicest out of the group of these men, even he was ready to just make a decision for her, being like, oh, she should go with her husband and be free. That would be so much better than the situation that she's in now. And I'm like, okay, but is it? And is that what she wants? And do you even know? He didn't know that she was pregnant. He didn't know that probably that she had a closer relationship with Ketil and that they had any kind of physical relationship between them, or that Ketil favored her in some specific way. He doesn't know the ins and outs of who she is. He didn't even know her basic backstory of like how she got here. And he's, oh, this is the best best decision for her. You don't know her. No one asking about what she even wants or what she's going through or her opinions, because it isn't considered. Not just because she's a slave, but because she's a woman. Even amongst slaves, she has less of an opinion that matters because she's a woman. And I think that's such an important dynamic to put into this. A lot of the series has been focused around men and male characters, and because of that, not a lot of the gender discussion has been brought into that. But now that we have one of the main cast being a woman, I love that we're putting in that dynamic, because a lot of the stuff that we had in season 1 was like fighting and battles and being like swords for hire and stuff, and that is very much a male dominated sphere. But then incorporating in the farm life and more like rural existence, you're going to have women there and children and other dynamics. So I think that it's a very important part of her experience and how the world views her that has to be considered. And I think it was done in such a subtle, integrated way. It wasn't on the nose. It wasn't trying to be preachy. It wasn't trying to make some kind of big statement about it in the way that I'm like more pinpointing that this is a specific issue. It was more just something that was incorporated into the way that she talked about it, right? Like just the wording of the men decided, right? And again, Snake making this offhanded comment to Aena, but it pulls forward into her story, right? There's so many things that are subtly intertwined with this specific issue without it having a spotlight specifically put on it. It's just incorporated into the world building and the way that she specifically talks about her experience, which I love. I love that it isn't something like, hey, gender inequality is a thing. It isn't hitting us over the head with that observation. It's just in the way that the words that she's choosing and the way that she's telling the story is because of how her gender affects the way that the world interacts with her, which I think is a wonderful writing. And it makes me more intrigued with her character and how she is going to further interact with the story. It just adds to the more complexities of what does peace mean? Because a lot of what we've been talking about of Thorfinn's view of peace and bringing an end to violence and war and stuff is focused on men's experience and not so much on women. So I think that it's interesting to bring that dynamic into it. But I hope you enjoyed watching that along with me. You can click this place to go and see my previous reactions, or you can subscribe so next time I post a Vinland Saga reaction. I will see you in the next video. Bye.